The world does not reward the most talented people. It rewards the people who can stay with one thing long after everyone else has walked away. That is the truth almost nobody wants to hear. We grow up believing excellence belongs to the gifted, that somewhere a small group of extraordinary people were simply born different. We tell ourselves they have better instincts, better opportunities, better timing, better luck. It is a comforting story because it protects us from asking a far more uncomfortable question. What if the distance between an ordinary life and an exceptional one has never been talent at all? What if it has always been the willingness to practice what others abandon? Every year, millions of people promise themselves they will master a skill. They buy the books. They watch the videos. They fill notebooks with ambitious plans. For a few days, they move with excitement, convinced that this time will be different. Then the excitement fades. The work becomes repetitive. Progress slows until it becomes almost invisible. Suddenly a new idea appears, a different strategy, another course, another shortcut, another promise that success can come faster somewhere else. And without realizing it, they leave the path once again. Most people never fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they never stay anywhere long enough for excellence to recognize them. The modern world celebrates speed, but mastery has never respected speed. It has always respected commitment. Every masterpiece, every breakthrough, every unforgettable performance began in a place that looked painfully ordinary. Long hours that nobody applauded. Small improvements nobody noticed. Quiet mornings when discipline mattered more than inspiration. Excellence is invisible while it is being built. That is why so few people ever reach it. They mistake silence for failure. They mistake repetition for stagnation. They mistake patience for weakness. The samurai understood something that our generation has almost completely forgotten. A sword is not forged by one powerful strike. It becomes unbreakable through thousands of deliberate moments that appear meaningless to anyone who does not understand the process. The same is true for the human mind. Character is not created in dramatic moments. It is shaped in the ordinary decisions repeated long after emotion disappears. Every distraction accepted weakens your attention. Every promise kept strengthens your identity. Every difficult practice completed without applause quietly transforms the person you are becoming. The tragedy is that most people quit only inches before the change becomes visible. They spend years searching for better methods while abandoning the very process that would have made them extraordinary. They confuse movement with progress and novelty with growth. They become collectors of beginnings instead of builders of mastery. But somewhere beyond the noise, beyond the endless chase for easier answers, there exists another path. It is older than modern success. Harder than motivation. Simpler than talent. It asks for no perfect background, no extraordinary genetics, no lucky break. Only one decision repeated every single day. And once one man discovered that path, everything he believed about greatness changed forever. Ethan was 28 years old, and from the outside his life looked respectable enough. He held a steady job, learned quickly, and impressed people whenever something new appeared. Friends called him talented because he seemed capable of picking up almost anything faster than everyone else. Yet every time he looked back at the last 10 years, one painful truth followed him like a shadow. He had become good at many things, but exceptional at none of them. His shelves were filled with unfinished books. His laptop contained half-completed projects. His closet still held equipment for hobbies that had lasted only a few months before being replaced by another exciting pursuit. Every new beginning felt like a promise. Every abandoned effort quietly became another reminder that potential alone had never changed a life. At first Ethan blamed his schedule. Then he blamed stress. Later he blamed the economy, the distractions of modern life, and even bad timing. But excuses eventually lose their power when they are repeated often enough. One quiet Sunday morning he sat alone with a cup of coffee, scrolling through old photos on his phone. There was a picture of him learning guitar. Another from a coding boot camp. Another wearing running shoes before training for a marathon he never finished. Another standing beside a canvas after deciding he would become a painter. Every photograph captured the same expression. Excitement. Hope. Confidence. Yet none of those versions of himself had survived long enough to become remarkable. For the first time, Ethan stopped asking why success felt so far away. Instead, he asked a more dangerous question. Why did he always leave before mastery had a chance to appear? That question stayed with him for weeks. He carried it to work. He carried it home. He carried it into every unfinished conversation with himself. Then one evening an elderly craftsman visited the office to restore a damaged wooden table that had belonged to the company's founder. Ethan watched as the old man examined every inch of the surface without rushing a single movement. His hands were calm. His breathing never changed. Nearly 4 hours passed before the first layer of polish reflected the afternoon light. Curious, Ethan finally asked how someone could spend decades doing the same work without becoming bored. The old craftsman smiled, not with pride, but with quiet certainty. He said, "Most people believe repetition kills passion. They never discover that repetition is where passion matures." Ethan remained silent. The old man continued working before adding one more sentence. "Amateurs fall in love with results. Masters fall in love with refinement." Those words refused to leave Ethan's mind. That night he searched through journals, biographies, and forgotten philosophies, hoping to find someone who had lived by that idea completely. Again and again one name appeared. Miyamoto Musashi. Not simply as a swordsman, but as a man who believed that excellence was never an accident. It was a way of living. Ethan expected to find techniques. Instead, he found something much more unsettling. Musashi never promised that mastery would make life easier. He suggested something entirely different. The greatest obstacle was never the skill itself. It was the restless mind that kept searching for something easier before the real transformation could begin. Ethan expected to discover a collection of hidden techniques, clever strategies, or some forgotten shortcut preserved through history. Instead, every page seemed to point toward the same uncomfortable truth. Musashi did not become extraordinary because he knew more than everyone else. He became extraordinary because he refused to escape the ordinary. At first, Ethan found the idea almost disappointing. It sounded too simple to explain greatness. Surely there had to be something more. A secret ritual. A special mindset. An advantage available only to a gifted few. Yet the more he studied, the more the illusion disappeared. Musashi returned to one principle over and over again. A man does not become exceptional by chasing perfection. He becomes exceptional by refining the same essential practice until it becomes part of his nature. Ethan looked around his own apartment with new eyes. Every unfinished project suddenly revealed the same pattern. He had mistaken novelty for progress. Whenever the excitement faded, he assumed growth had stopped. He had never realized that boredom was not the end of learning. It was the doorway that separated the curious from the committed. Most people never walk through that doorway because their minds are constantly searching for stimulation instead of refinement. They want visible improvement every day. They want immediate confirmation that their effort is working. But mastery speaks a different language. It rewards consistency long before it rewards results. It tests patience before it reveals progress. It asks the same question every morning. Will you continue even when nothing exciting happens today? Ethan remembered the old craftsman polishing the wooden table. Not once had the man rushed. Not once had he looked impatient. Every movement carried complete attention, as though the smallest detail deserved the same respect as the finished masterpiece. Suddenly Ethan understood something he had overlooked. The craftsman was not polishing wood. He was polishing himself. Every careful motion strengthened qualities that could never be measured with a stopwatch or a scorecard. patience, precision, presence. These invisible habits accumulated quietly until excellence became unavoidable. Musashi believed the same transformation happened in every discipline. The artist, the athlete, the entrepreneur, the musician, the writer, the teacher, the parent. The field did not matter nearly as much as the way the person approached it. Average people practiced until they could perform the task. Masters practiced until the task transformed the person performing it. That difference changed everything. Suddenly repetition was no longer punishment. It became identity. Every deliberate action whispered the same message. This is who I am becoming. Ethan realized he had spent years asking the wrong question. He had always asked, how long will this take? Masters asked something entirely different. Who will this practice shape me into if I refuse to leave? The answer could not be found in a single day or even a single year. It could only be discovered by someone willing to remain on the path after the excitement disappeared. For the first time in his life, Ethan stopped searching for a better method. Instead, he began wondering whether the greatest breakthrough had been waiting inside the very repetition he had spent years trying to escape. The next morning Ethan made a decision that felt almost insignificant. He chose one skill he had abandoned months earlier and promised himself he would stop measuring success by visible improvement. Instead, he would measure success by one thing alone: showing up. He cleared his desk, silenced every notification, placed a notebook beside him, and began working with complete attention. The first 20 minutes felt easy. The next 20 felt slower. By the end of the first hour his mind had already started whispering its familiar suggestions. Check your messages. Watch one more video. Research a better technique. Maybe there is a faster way. The voice sounded reasonable because it always did. It never announced itself as distraction. It disguised itself as productivity. Ethan almost reached for his phone before catching himself. For the first time, he noticed the pattern instead of obeying it. The real battle was not between effort and laziness. It was between attention and escape. Musashi understood this centuries before smartphones, endless entertainment, or constant notifications existed. The tools had changed, but the human mind had not. It still searched for comfort whenever effort became repetitive. It still preferred excitement over refinement. That morning Ethan remembered another line from his reading. Do not practice until the difficult becomes easy. Practice until the easy is performed with extraordinary care. At first those words seemed almost impossible to understand. Why spend so much time repeating something simple? Then he thought about the old craftsman once more. The craftsman did not become remarkable because he worked on complicated projects every day. He became remarkable because he refused to perform ordinary work carelessly. Excellence was never hiding inside complexity. It was hiding inside complete attention. Ethan slowed down. Every movement became deliberate. Every mistake became information instead of frustration. He stopped asking how much he had accomplished and started asking whether he had been fully present during the work itself. Hours passed differently than before. Time no longer felt like something to survive until the next reward. It became the place where refinement quietly happened. He noticed something unexpected. The task itself had not changed, but his relationship with it had. Boredom began losing its power because curiosity replaced it. Instead of searching for bigger progress, he searched for smaller improvements. A smoother motion. A clearer thought. A better question. A more precise decision. Tiny adjustments that would have seemed meaningless to the version of himself who only chased dramatic breakthroughs. That was when another realization emerged. Masters do not become exceptional because they experience fewer distractions than everyone else. They become exceptional because they return their attention faster each time it wanders. Focus is not permanent. It is practiced. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is a repeated decision. Presence is not something you discover. It is something you protect. Ethan finally understood why so many people remain trapped in mediocrity despite working hard. They were waiting for the perfect mental state before giving their full effort. Masters reversed the order. They gave their full effort first, and the right mental state slowly followed. That single shift changed everything. For the first time in years, Ethan finished his practice without wondering whether he had done enough. He asked a completely different question. Could he return tomorrow with the same patience? Because deep inside, he was beginning to suspect that greatness was never built in extraordinary days. It was built when ordinary days stopped feeling too small to matter. Days turned into weeks, and something unusual began to happen. The skill itself was improving, but that was no longer the most important change. Ethan noticed that the person sitting down to practice each morning was different from the man who had once abandoned every challenge the moment progress slowed. He no longer searched for excitement before beginning. He simply began. Yet just when he believed he had finally found his rhythm, another obstacle quietly emerged. It was not distraction this time. It was his own ego. After seeing steady improvement, Ethan felt an old temptation returning. He wanted recognition. He wanted proof that his effort was paying off. He imagined showing others how much better he had become. He caught himself comparing his progress to people online, measuring his worth against strangers whose journeys he knew nothing about. The same restless mind had simply changed its disguise. It no longer whispered, "Quit." Now it whispered, "Prove yourself." Musashi warned against this long before the modern world invented followers, likes, and endless comparison. He believed that the moment your attention shifts from the work itself to the applause surrounding it, your growth begins to slow. Ego creates noise where clarity once existed. It turns practice into performance and learning into competition. The craftsman no longer asks, "How can I improve?" He begins asking, "How do I appear?" Those are two completely different paths. Ethan remembered watching the elderly craftsman restore the wooden table. Never once had the old man looked around to see whether anyone was watching. Every careful movement came from respect for the craft itself, not from the possibility of praise. That quiet memory became a lesson stronger than any book. True mastery is private long before it becomes visible. It is built through thousands of choices that nobody celebrates. In fact, some of the most important moments happen when there is no audience at all. The discipline to repeat. The humility to correct mistakes. The patience to remain a beginner a little longer. These moments never make headlines, yet they create every remarkable achievement people admire years later. Ethan began changing the questions he asked at the end of each day. He stopped asking whether he had outperformed someone else. He stopped wondering whether his progress looked impressive enough. Instead he asked, "Did I honor today's practice with my full attention? Did I leave this session slightly better than I entered it?" Surprisingly, those quieter questions brought deeper satisfaction than external approval ever had. For the first time, improvement felt stable because it no longer depended on someone else's opinion. Musashi believed that a person attached to praise becomes controlled by praise, just as a person afraid of criticism becomes controlled by criticism. Freedom begins when neither voice decides the quality of your work. Ethan slowly understood that excellence was not a destination waiting somewhere in the future. It was a daily standard expressed through ordinary actions performed with extraordinary care. Every patient repetition weakened his ego a little more and strengthened his character a little more. The greatest victory was not becoming better than another person. It was becoming less distracted by the need to compare at all. And once that burden began to disappear, Ethan discovered a level of focus he had never experienced before, making him wonder whether the final barrier to mastery had never been lack of talent, but the constant desire to be seen. As the months passed, Ethan stopped looking for dramatic breakthroughs because he had learned that the deepest transformations rarely announced themselves. They appeared quietly, hidden inside ordinary mornings and repeated choices. One evening, while reading another passage inspired by Musashi's philosophy, he noticed a pattern that connected every lesson he had encountered. The principles were different, yet they all rested on the same foundation. Absolute attention. Relentless repetition. Honest correction. Patient endurance. Genuine humility. They were not separate techniques. They were parts of a single way of living. Ethan wrote them on a single page and placed it beside his desk, not as rules to memorize but as reminders of the person he wanted to become. The first principle was absolute attention. Wherever the mind wandered, the quality of the work followed. A divided mind produced divided results. Every meaningful accomplishment demanded complete presence, even during the smallest tasks. The second principle was repetition with intention. Simply repeating an action was never enough. Every repetition carried a question. What can become slightly better this time? Even the smallest refinement accumulated over hundreds of days until improvement became impossible to ignore. The third principle was honest correction. Most people protected their pride by avoiding mistakes. Masters protected their future by studying mistakes without emotion. Every error became a teacher instead of an enemy. The fourth principle was patient endurance. Growth refused to follow the schedule of human impatience. Some days felt productive. Others appeared completely unchanged. Yet both kinds of days belonged to the same journey. The person who remained consistent during invisible progress eventually reached visible excellence. The final principle was humility. The moment someone believed there was nothing left to learn, improvement quietly stopped. Curiosity kept the path alive. Gratitude kept the ego small. Humility allowed every new day to become another opportunity instead of another performance. Ethan realized that these principles reached far beyond any single skill. They explained why some leaders earned lasting trust while others lost it. They explained why certain relationships grew stronger over decades while others slowly faded. They explained why one business quietly expanded year after year while another collapsed after chasing every new trend. Mastery was never limited to one profession because character influenced everything a person touched. Looking back, Ethan smiled at the man he used to be. He had searched everywhere for complicated systems while overlooking the simple discipline standing directly in front of him. He had believed success required discovering something extraordinary. Instead, he discovered that extraordinary lives are built through ordinary actions performed with extraordinary consistency. Nothing about the process looked exciting from the outside, and perhaps that was exactly why so few people embraced it. The world admired finished masterpieces but rarely appreciated the invisible habits that created them. Ethan finally understood that the greatest advantage was not intelligence, talent, or luck. It was the willingness to continue refining the same fundamentals after everyone else became impatient. In that realization he felt something deeper than motivation. He felt certainty. Yet another question quietly emerged before he closed his notebook that evening. If these principles could transform one person's life so completely, what was the invisible force that caused so many capable people to abandon them before their true potential ever had the chance to appear? The answer revealed itself slowly, not through another book or another lesson, but through the people Ethan observed every day. He began noticing that most capable individuals did not fail because they lacked ability. They failed because they surrendered to invisible enemies that rarely looked dangerous at first. One person constantly chased new opportunities, believing the next idea would finally unlock success. Another waited for motivation before beginning important work, allowing emotions to become the leader instead of discipline. Someone else became discouraged whenever progress could not be measured quickly enough. Different lives, different professions, yet the same hidden pattern repeated itself. The greatest obstacle was never outside them. It lived quietly inside the habits of the mind. Ethan remembered a thought often associated with Musashi's philosophy. The greatest battle is not fought against another person. It is fought against the version of yourself that always seeks comfort over growth. For years he had misunderstood that statement. He imagined a dramatic struggle, something extraordinary that appeared only during life's biggest moments. Instead, he discovered that the real battle happened dozens of times each day. It happened every time he reached for distraction instead of remaining focused. Every time impatience tempted him to abandon steady progress. Every time comparison stole his attention from his own path. Every time his ego demanded recognition before the work was complete. These moments seemed too small to matter, yet together they shaped the direction of an entire life. Ethan no longer viewed discipline as a burden. He began seeing it as protection. Every deliberate routine protected his attention from unnecessary noise. Every quiet morning protected his future from today's impulses. Every promise kept to himself strengthened trust in the person he was becoming. Confidence, he realized, was not created by repeating positive thoughts. It was created by repeatedly proving to yourself that your actions could be trusted. That understanding changed the way he approached every challenge. Instead of asking whether something would be difficult, he asked whether it was worthy of consistent effort. If the answer was yes, temporary discomfort no longer frightened him. He understood that discomfort often signaled growth rather than danger. Like a tree developing stronger roots through changing seasons, character deepened through steady resistance, not endless comfort. The world still celebrated instant success stories, overnight achievements, and spectacular moments of recognition, but Ethan could now see what those stories usually ignored. Hidden beneath every visible accomplishment were countless ordinary days that looked almost identical. Days without applause. Days without excitement. Days when the only victory was refusing to quit. Those invisible days were the true birthplace of excellence. Gradually his life became quieter, yet far more meaningful. He needed less external validation because the work itself became rewarding. He worried less about competing with others because his greatest competition had become the person he had been yesterday. Every improvement, no matter how small, became another stone placed carefully on a foundation that would support everything else he hoped to build. Then one evening, as he closed his notebook after another deliberate practice session, a final realization began taking shape. Mastery was not simply about building remarkable skills. It was about building a remarkable life. And to do that completely, there was one final illusion that still had to be abandoned before true freedom could begin. Weeks became months, and the change in Ethan could no longer be measured only by the quality of his work. It appeared in the way he spoke, the way he listened, and the way he carried himself through ordinary days. Friends noticed that he no longer rushed to fill every silence. Co-workers noticed that he completed difficult tasks without complaining. Even challenges that once would have frustrated him now became invitations to pay closer attention. The transformation was subtle, almost invisible, yet it reached every corner of his life. One afternoon a younger colleague asked him what had changed. Ethan smiled because he remembered asking the same question of the elderly craftsman months before. He thought for a moment before answering. I stopped trying to become impressive. I started trying to become dependable. The words surprised even him because they captured everything he had been learning. Dependability was not glamorous. It did not create dramatic stories overnight. Yet it quietly built trust, skill, confidence, and peace of mind in ways that excitement never could. Looking back, Ethan realized that his greatest mistake had never been lacking discipline. His greatest mistake had been believing that success required constant intensity. He had imagined that exceptional people woke every morning filled with endless motivation. The truth was far simpler. They honored their commitments even when inspiration was nowhere to be found. Their strength came from rhythm, not emotion. From consistency, not excitement. Musashi understood that the strongest tree does not become strong during a single storm. It becomes strong because it continues growing through every season without abandoning its nature. Human character follows the same law. Small promises kept every day become quiet sources of enormous strength. Ethan also discovered another unexpected freedom. When he stopped obsessing over outcomes, he became more capable of achieving them. Anxiety lost its grip because every day already contained success. Success was no longer a distant finish line. It was completing today's work with complete honesty. The future no longer felt overwhelming because he had learned to respect the present moment instead of escaping it. Ironically, this made his long-term progress faster than it had ever been before. While others searched endlessly for better systems, Ethan continued refining simple fundamentals. While others constantly restarted, he continued building. While others chased temporary motivation, he relied on habits that no longer depended on emotion. Year after year those quiet differences accumulated until the gap between consistency and inconsistency became impossible to ignore. The extraordinary was never created through extraordinary effort alone. It emerged from ordinary effort sustained far beyond what most people considered reasonable. Ethan finally understood why true masters often appeared calm. They no longer wasted energy fighting reality. They accepted that meaningful growth required time, patience, humility, and unwavering attention. Instead of resisting that truth, they organized their lives around it. As the evening sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Ethan closed his notebook one more time and realized that the journey had never really been about mastering a skill. Every practice session, every repeated movement, every patient correction had quietly shaped something far more valuable. They had shaped the person making those choices. And in that moment he understood the final illusion that had once controlled his life. Mastery had never been a destination waiting somewhere ahead. It had been unfolding within him one ordinary day at a time, preparing him for a realization that would remain long after every achievement eventually faded. Years later, people often asked Ethan when everything had finally changed. They expected him to describe one defining moment, one brilliant decision, or one life-changing opportunity that transformed an ordinary man into someone quietly respected wherever he went. He always smiled because the answer disappointed those who were searching for dramatic stories. Nothing changed all at once. There was no single morning when he suddenly became disciplined, confident, or exceptional. There were only thousands of ordinary mornings when he chose not to betray the person he wanted to become. Looking back, he understood that every meaningful transformation had begun long before any visible result appeared. It began the moment he stopped negotiating with discomfort. It began the moment he stopped chasing excitement and started honoring repetition. It began the moment he realized that excellence was never something to be achieved for the world to admire. It was something to practice in private until it became impossible to separate from his character. The wisdom associated with Musashi no longer felt like ancient philosophy preserved inside old books. It had become part of the rhythm of Ethan's everyday life. Every challenge became another opportunity to refine his attention. Every setback became another invitation to strengthen his patience. Every success became another reminder to remain humble enough to keep learning. He no longer feared slow progress because he had witnessed what slow progress eventually became. Like a river shaping stone without force or hurry, consistent effort quietly transformed what once appeared impossible. Ethan eventually understood why so many people abandoned the path before discovering its greatest reward. They believed mastery was about becoming better than others. In reality, mastery was about becoming free from the version of yourself that constantly demanded easier roads, faster results, and endless validation. The greatest victory was never external. It was waking each day knowing that your actions reflected your deepest values instead of your temporary emotions. That kind of freedom could never be purchased. It could never be inherited. It could only be earned through countless ordinary decisions repeated with honesty. The remarkable irony was that once Ethan stopped trying to impress the world, the quality of everything he created naturally began to speak for itself. His work improved because his attention improved. His relationships deepened because his presence deepened. His confidence grew because it was no longer built upon praise but upon promises faithfully kept. He had not become a different person overnight. He had become the same person repeatedly, one deliberate choice at a time, until those choices formed an unshakable foundation. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden beneath every enduring achievement. The world will always celebrate visible victories, but those victories are only shadows cast by invisible habits. Long before excellence can be seen, it must first be lived. Long before mastery can be recognized, it must first be practiced in silence. Every extraordinary life begins where almost nobody is willing to remain, inside the quiet discipline of ordinary days. The path has never belonged to the most talented. It has always belonged to the ones who return tomorrow, and the day after that, carrying the same humility, the same patience, and the same unwavering commitment to refine themselves one honest step at a time. That is how an ordinary life slowly becomes a remarkable one, not through a single moment of greatness, but through a lifetime of choosing the next faithful step when nobody else is watching.